Another recording here now, and I'm going to save as what I did last week, and I'm going to save it as project and call it assignment C start here. So again, one method you may want to use in classes, if you want to try to work along with me to some degree, make a copy of your previous file, and you might want to call it C-in class for your own use, and that way if you have more time to go back and start from the beginning of C, you can do your homework from start to finish.
Can you save that as a project? Can you save it?
Yeah, it's saved as a project. It's kind of almost unnecessary that when you go into the application menu and say save as, it gives you a choice of project, template, or library. Really, 99 times out of 100, you're going to be saving a project from it. If you're creating templates, then you might save one of your projects as a new template to use in the future. So now I've got B open, and I'm going to go ahead and open the handout for C. What's that? Yeah, save as what you finished as C. And I'm going to just pause the recording, resume recording. Okay, so in the handout it says let's create the existing first floor. Now when you're in a floor plan, if you're used to using AutoCAD, for instance, I'm going to go, first of all, I'm going to pull up my level 1 work view, L1 existing architectural view. And I really don't want to see footings on here. So does anybody remember what I do to change this view so I'm not looking an unlimited depth into the ground and I don't see what's down below? It has something to do with the view. It's not the actual model that's wrong, it's just this particular plan view that's looking too deeply. So the view property, if you look in your property spot here and you don't have anything selected, these are the properties of my view. So if you scroll down all the way to the bottom, view range edit, that's the thing that we want to monkey with here. So I think, Billy, you were asking about this before class. How does that view range work? So let's go ahead and look at that. If I say edit view range here, there's 3 different settings. Actually, there's 4. Top, the cut plane, the bottom, and the view depth level. In this case, we don't really care about the top too much because we would mainly be concerned about that if we're in a ceiling plan, which we're not, or if there was something hanging above us that we want to show as dashed, like it's the ceiling fan component that actually shows up in a plan view, so that we have it dashed in. So what we want to do is the cut plane we leave at 4 feet. That's where you're slicing through the building looking down in plan. At the bottom, we don't want it to be unlimited. We want to set it back to the first floor, offset 0. And then whatever you do, typically what you do to the bottom, I do the same thing to the view depth level. In the ceiling plan, it's the other way around. What I do to the top, I do to the view depth level. And we'll get to ceiling plans a little later in the semester. And if only applying it to this specific view. Right. The view range is specific to each and every plan view. There is no such thing in a section or an elevation or 3D, just plans, and each plan has its own view range settings.
So it won't update on the L1.
Right. If I go back to the L1 plan, it still shows footings. So really, I'm going to want to fix it there too. So while I'm thinking of it, let's just go ahead and fix that. But the reason I have an L1 and a work L1 is that L1 is the view that we're going to end up, well, actually, it's already on a sheet. Because in the template that you used at the beginning of the semester, there was already a sheet called A100 or an A101X. And there's that L01 plan view, and that's the one that's sized properly to be put on a sheet. Why does it not have the scale? That's weird. 3/16 scale. Anyway, so now I want to be in my work view, which is this one. Now I'm kind of done with those dimensions because I use them to create the walls in assignment A. So what I could do is I could delete them all. Well, I love to pick on a former coworker of mine, friend, because he made a mistake that is a great example to set in front of everybody. And I call, well, I won't say his name because I've said it enough, but there's a new feature in 2012 or 2011, I believe, that they added. It was 2011. That hadn't been there before. There's a great little shortcut on the right-click menu that says right-click, select all instances. And up until 2010, including 2010, it said select all instances, and you clicked it, and you would have grabbed all of the walls of that type or all of the doors of that type or whatever you're selecting, whatever you've clicked on. So I say select all instances in the entire project, and that way I know I've just grabbed every single 13-inch brick and plaster wall in the whole project. Well, when you get down to a view, remember that each view, not only does it have its own view range, like Christian brought up, it also has its own set of annotation and stuff called detailing, where if I added some stick-on two-dimensional things to make it look more detailed than what the 3D model really has. And so these dimension strings only exist in this one plan view. So if I delete that dimension, it doesn't affect any other view. Well, this buddy of mine had been working on a project that there were about 5 or 6 of us working on. It was a big multi-story house with all these different views. And he went in here and he said, I want to delete all these dimensions from this view. So he right-clicked on it and said, select all instances. And at the time, he just clicked it and it selected everything in the whole project. And then he hit the delete key. And he has just deleted not just the dimensions he saw in this view, but every dimension in the whole project. So he pulled up another view somewhere else. Where are the dimensions? Pulled up another view. Where are the dimensions? Oh, no. And he realizes an hour ago I deleted every dimension in the whole project. And it was too late to go back and undo because other people had been working. It was in a central file that had been synchronized. So fortunately, and I'm going to cancel out of that. Fortunately, once you're working as a team, which we'll find in assignment L, which is just show up and practice, there's no homework for L, except read the handout before you come. When you're work sharing, everybody has kind of a duplicate copy of the central model that's on your server. And so every time somebody synchronizes, they get an update that matches exactly what's on the central file. And so you can go through the list when you're in that mode and you say, okay, here's when Hayden saved at noon, here's when so-and-so saved at 1:30. Here's when Don saved at 1:45. And so let's say it was Don who messed it up. So I look in here and I say, okay, if Don saved at 1:45 and Hayden had last saved at 1:30, we want to roll back to Hayden's copy at 1:30. You know, just as an example. And you can do that. You can either roll back to it or you can say, I actually want to copy that version out separately and compare the two. So almost any kind of what could be disaster situation, there's a way out of in Revit. But because this obviously didn't just happen with this guy, I'm sure other people had this happen, they changed the right click to say select all instances either in the whole project or just in the view. And in this case, I just want to select all the dimensions in this one plan view. The only confusing thing is it says visible in view. What it really means is all of them that show up somewhere in the view that I have on the screen. I don't necessarily have to see them in the screen right now. They could be below the screen. But if I was to zoom extents of this view, they would be there. So I selected all the dimensions in that view, and I can tell, you can't see it here, but in your corner of the screen it should have a little funnel that says how many of those things are selected. And it would say, if I had room on my screen, that's, let me try stretching it onto the other monitor, 14 dimensions that I've selected. Then I just delete them. Now, somewhere in there, remember I had an equal dimension. It was probably the center line of one of these. I don't remember exactly. And if I say unconstrained, then after I delete the dimension, there's no longer a lock that happened between the two. When we get into placing doors next week, we're going to center a door in this space, and I'll go over how those equal dimensions work. So now I'm ready to move on with assignment C. So the first thing we want to do is create a floor. Now, if you go to the Home tab, Floor is a button of its own here. And there's a down arrow next to it that says, well, there's more than just floor. There's a floor, a structural floor, a floor by face, which we won't get into. That's for massing, and a slab edge. Yeah?
Is there a way to separate those dimensions out, like put them on their own layer that you can turn on and off?
There's not really layering, but you just say, I don't want to see dimensions. So if I undo the delete, I go to, anybody remember what I do to say I want to turn off something in the view? There's a shortcut for it, but it's graphic display, visibility graphics overrides, this edit button right here. And that shows you basically something comparable to a list of layers, but instead of layers, it is categories. So it's got the model categories, the three-dimensional stuff of the building, and then it's got annotation categories. So if I want to not see the dimensions in this view, I just uncheck dimensions on the list, and then they're still there, they just aren't visible. So it's kind of analogous to turning off the dimension layer in this view, freezing it, if you will. Now, the shortcut to that is VG. So you'll hear me say, go to the VG dialog. Instead of looking for visibility graphics overrides edit, just type VG without enter. And then you scroll down and for annotation, dimensions, and you recheck it. And then you've turned them back on.
Does that affect plotting?
Yeah, what you see in this respect, we will plot that way. So if I have them hidden and I plot it, they won't be showing up on the plot. There are just a couple of exceptions to that. What you see is what you get in a plot business. And we'll talk about those when we get into sheets in assignment J. So I'm going to go ahead and re-delete them. Select all instances in the view, delete them because I'm done with them. And now I'm going to worry about getting the floor right. So what I have you do is go to Home, click Floor. Now when you click the Floor button, really that's not just floor, that's create a new floor. Because in a little bit we're going to make a floor, then we're going to go back and we're going to say, well, let's edit that floor and change it. But we don't hit the floor button to go back and edit one we've already got. We only hit the floor button when we're creating a fresh floor for the first time. So now, notice how everything's grayed out. And what this means is, if you escape, unlike every other command that we've used so far, escape doesn't get you out of this mode. You're stuck. It's kind of like you're in the Twilight Zone. And this is called sketch mode. And the term sketch sounds a little misleading. It doesn't mean freehand something. It means you're outlining the boundary of something. So whenever there's an object that you have to outline, typically Revit kicks you into sketch mode. And now in the latest versions, they don't even say finish and cancel. But that's what the green check and the red X mean, is finish the sketch, the edit mode, or cancel out of the edit mode or sketch mode. So you can't do anything else. I can't go and delete a wall or move a door or do anything else until I either get out of this and finish it or cancel. And if I try to finish it when I don't have anything sketched, I get a message that says, sketch is empty. Do you want to quit and forget filling the floor? Or do you want to continue and finish what you were starting, which is outline the area of the floor? So I'm going to say continue. So what I have to do is I have to draw the boundary of this floor. And every time I draw something, it's going to show up in a magenta line like this. So that's how you can tell your sketch. And again, if I escape, it doesn't get me out of the floor command like it does the wall command or the reference plane command. But when I escape, I'm no longer drawing lines. This draw panel, I think we use that when we're doing walls, either as straight lines or as rectangles. Well, I actually want to go back and delete these lines. So the same rules apply for lines as they do for walls. If I hover and tab, I can select the chain, click it to select it, delete it. I can box things in. So sketch mode behaves similarly to the normal mode when you're grabbing walls, except that the only thing you're dealing with here are lines of the sketch. Now, when you first enter sketch mode for a floor, it doesn't check the lines or the rectangles button. It checks the pick walls button. That's because normally in architecture, your floor goes up and stops at the edge of a wall more times than not. So Revit assumes that and says, okay, you're probably going to want to pick these walls as your boundaries for your floor. So I'm going to start by just making a big rectangular floor in the middle of the old part of the house. And to do that, I just click on one of the walls, and it puts a sketch line up against the wall. But notice how it went past the plaster, which probably makes sense, because the core of the wall is the solid brick. And outside of the core of that wall is my plaster. And so you're not going to have the framing of the floor stop an inch away from where the brick is. It's going to come all the way up to the face of the brick. And it might even bury some of the joists into the brick, but it's supported one way or another off the brick. So by default, when you're in pick walls mode for a floor, look on our options bar here, and it says extend into wall to core. What that means is when you pick that wall, the sketch line is going to be past the finish and into the edge of the brick in this case. So let's say we were doing, and we'll do this later in the semester, if we build an addition that's not solid brick and plaster, it's wood stud with sheathing, airspace brick. and a piece of gypboard on the inside. In that case, the core of the wall will be the stud and possibly the sheathing. So when you pick the floor against that wall, it's going to go past the gypboard, and it's either going to hit the inside or the outside of the wood stud and sheathing core of the wall. So I just go along merrily and pick the other 3 walls here, and I've got myself a rectangle. And so now, let's say I escape and I delete one of those. So I've got an open-ended C shape. If I try to finish now, it gives me another error message. It says you can't finish this sketch because you don't have a closed loop. Well, it's kind of like a sketch. It's kind of like cutting something out of a piece of paper. You have to take your scissors and go all the way around, otherwise you don't have a finished cutout. So it's telling me that, and it highlights in orange the endpoints that are dangling in space. So you don't want to quit sketching. You say, okay, continue, and I'll finish and fix it before I try again. So I say continue. I pick walls one more time here. And normally, if the 2 walls trim to a corner, the 2 sketch lines will automatically trim to the corner as well. Now, one more thing before I finish, you'll notice that the last sketch line that I put in with pick walls has a flip arrow. If I do that, it says I'm going to go to the outside of the core of the wall or inside. So if I did that on a brick and stud and void and air and brick, it would go from the outside to the inside of the wood stud. Question?
When I clicked on the finish button, it said, would you like the walls to go up to the first floor's level to attach to its bottom?
Okay, that's a really important question, so I'm going to get to that in 1 second.
It didn't do what
Okay.
popped up on your...
Yeah, because I didn't have a finished rectangle, so that means when you tried to finish, you really had a closed loop. So you're good so far. So when I try to finish, now I'm going to get that same message, and I call this a Nancy Reagan question because it's, you know, she said, just say no to drugs. This is just say no. We never, almost never want to answer this question with a yes, because what it's designed to do is, let's say I'm building a floor on the interior of a building and I've got a bunch of partitions on the floor below me. It assumes you want to take the top of all those basement partitions and run them up to the underside of this floor. So if I say yes, that's what it should do. But unfortunately, what it does do is it tries to attach the top of these brick walls to the underside of the floor. And later, well, we have our foundations already in there, don't we? So it's going to try to attach the rubble wall to the underside of the floor. So let me say yes so you can see what happens, because I guarantee at least one of you will have this happen and not realize what happened. So if you say yes to the Nancy Reagan question and look at it in 3D, you're going to end up with a slot. And that's because it attached the top of that foundation wall to the underside of that floor. And so I can get out of it by saying, I'm going to undo one time, so I'm back into the sketch. I'm going to go back to my plan, Control-Tab. So if I try to finish again, and this time I can say no to that question, then it doesn't do that. And when I look at it in 3D, then I don't have that belt that's been cut into the foundation. It's correct.
So does that mean that the partition walls will still go to the top lip?
Well, in this case, the walls that it was trying to attach were the foundation walls, so they're going to stay where they were, which is correct. But we hadn't built any basement interior walls yet. If we had, by saying yes, they would have been fixed, but unfortunately the foundation walls would have erroneously been stopped as well. So that's just one of these things where Revit makes some incorrect assumptions.
When you go into sketch mode on it, the grayscale of the background, is there any control over the shading effect? Mine barely can see it.
Yeah, if you go to hidden line, usually that's what I recommend, because then it's easier to see the contrast between the magenta lines and the white background. But as of 2012, even if you're in shaded mode, which normally show the brick as red, in this case it goes ahead and whites out all the bricks. So it's better than it used to be. But the line weight of the sketch is kind of hard to read if you zoom in. You just have to look for that magenta.
I don't hardly see it.
We're not in sketch mode yet, so hit 4.
Yeah, I know that. When I went to it, see? Yeah, I see it on close, but it's like...
Well, you're in a wireframe, so go to hidden line, next box over. So you got a wireframe, so you're seeing through everything. So if you go to
How do you know you're on wire?
Because it looks like a see-through box.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see.
So let me just show...
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, what Corey had was this box was set to wireframe, and if you do that, you don't really see much of anything because everything is transparent, which I didn't realize it looked that ugly when you did wireframe. So I'm ready to finish again, and I say no. So now I've built a floor, but I didn't pay any attention to what floor type to use. Remember, we've talked about wall types. Floor types work the same way. So I'm looking at my handout to see at what point I told you what floor type to use. Yeah, on step H, I've been telling it what floor type to use. So you can either fix it after you're done and change it to the right floor type, or while you're in sketch mode, if I can undo and go back into sketch mode again, then the properties up here where it says properties and it gives you the type, you can pick which floor type that you're going to be finishing in the sketch. And what we want is the wood 2x10, 3/4 inch plywood wood finish. So it's this floor type right here. And so now if I finish the sketch again and say no, now the new floor is yellow.
Mine's still blue.
Okay, that means you haven't deselected it, because anything that's currently selected is blue. So escape to deselect it, and it'll show up as yellow. Now, okay. Try zooming in or out and see if it's gray, then it's probably not the right floor type. Because the first time I did it, let me go back in here now. If I just finish it with the other type, it's gray. And now, to select the existing floor is kind of tough because the edges of the floor are buried in the wall. So if you try to click, you're picking the wall by mistake, and you can't point to the middle of a bland surface and get it to select. So the trick I use, remember when we talked about how to select things, you can box them in, you can click on them and hold control. Sometimes you can tab and get the right thing to light up. There's the wall, there's the chain, there's the wall. That's not it. But the other way to do things was do a crossing window. So if I cross from right to left, then I've selected anything that I cut through in that box, and that includes the window, the wall, and the floor. See, now my floor is blue, but I can't edit the floor if I've also got a wall selected. So I go into my filter, and I say, well, I crossed a couple of objects. I just want to take out the walls that I selected, and now I just have one floor selected. Now I can go back into the sketch mode again with that floor because there's an edit boundary button. So edit boundary means go back into sketch mode and modify that outline that you've already created before. And in this case, I'm not going to do anything yet, but I wanted to show you how to select it. So I can do this, filter out the walls, and I have it selected. Now I could just change it from the generic 12-inch, which is gray, to the wood 2x10, 3/4 inch plywood wood finish. So really this floor type is probably not accurate to this old house. It probably didn't even have a plywood subfloor. It probably was just 2x10s with a 3/4 inch hardwood tongue and groove on top of it. But for the purpose of our example, it's got both. So now if I want to see how that floor type is built, just like we looked at wall types,
How do you pull up the little checkbox of what you guys select?
you select and then you look for this filter up here. It looks like a funnel. And the funnel at the top is because there's more than one category of stuff selected. If I selected 3 walls, then there is no funnel at the top, but there's a funnel down in the lower right corner that says 3. And that's because there's nothing to filter if you've only got one category of stuff selected. So the filter only pops up when you've got multiple categories of things selected. And you can't really change the properties of a wall if you've got a wall and a floor select. Same with the floor. You can't really change floor properties unless you filter out the wall. What I did is I said I'm going to select, cross through, and filter out the walls, so I've just got a floor selected. Now that that floor is selected by itself, then I see this edit boundary button up here at the top. And when you click that, it means go back into the existing sketch. And then I can change it.
What if your property, when you saw the floor, was not in
In the filter?
no, not the filter, in the property listing?
Okay, let me take a look what you got here.
I got
Okay, do your crossing window. Okay, now pull up the filter. Now uncheck walls. Now you actually got 2 floors because you probably built one on top of another. So that's an easy mistake to make. You don't realize there's already a floor there. So turn it back into color shaded so that you can see the yellow floor or the gray floor. That helps. Because if you're just in hidden line, I can't really tell I've got a floor there. But did I show you all the section box in 3D yet?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, this is one of my favorite tools in Revit. Let's pull up our 3D view. And I can see the floor in 3D, and I can also select it more easily. Notice how that wood floor, now that I've got the correct floor type, it has a linear pattern of boards on it. Well, the reason I'm not seeing that in my plan view is because I've turned off the floor pattern. Sometimes in a plan view, that floor pattern gets so busy that I can't see dimensions, I can't pick the right thing, because when there's a linear pattern, then it wants to select the floor because I'm hovering over one of those lines in the pattern. So I can go in my plan and say VG, and if I look on here, floors are not unchecked, but if I look over to the right of floors, there's a little hidden under the pattern of the surface pattern. So that means that I'm seeing floors, I'm just not seeing the surface pattern on floors. So I can click that and override it and say I want the pattern to be visible. And then when I OK my way out of it, now in the plan view, as well as the 3D, I see that floor pattern. But I like to turn that off a lot of times in plan because that's just too much going on, especially if the pattern is black, which I really should have changed it to a gray, but still, it's too busy. And in fact, in some of my handouts, I've got the floor pattern turned on, and I'd rather have it turned off. So I'll try to fix that before we get to one of the later assignments where I have that. Yeah.
How do you get those slats?
You go to VG, and you look on the row where floors is. And if you don't highlight that row, you'll probably still see a box here under this column that says projection surface pattern. Does it say hidden there? So if you click on where it says hidden, you can remove that override so that it's not hidden anymore. Once you go in here, you say, I want to make it visible. Yeah, it was already turned off for you. So that's why you're having to go in and turn it on if you want to see it. So because that's a linear pattern and not just a stippling, now it's a lot easier to select the floor because if I just point to anywhere on those linear pattern lines and click it, I've selected the floor. Problem is it causes more problems because if I'm trying to grab this wall, I accidentally grab the floor instead of the wall. It's just really hard to work with. So I normally turn it off. And then I live with, so I uncheck visible in this little box. And I live with the fact that if I want to select that floor, I do the little crossing filter trick. But I wanted to go to 3D because it's also easy to see in 3D. And I think you're telling me that I went over the section box. Oh, I can't remember what I've shown who, but this section box is great. And you turn it on, you go into the view properties in your 3D view. Check the little box, it says section box. And then you can select the box, click on it, and it turns blue. And you get these grips on each of the 6 faces of the cube. And I'm going to pull that in so I'm cutting away. So now it's like a section, but it's a 3D section. So then I can tell, there's my floor. See how it eats into the wall? But the Nancy Reagan question that I said no to, there was also, when we get to the second floor, it will ask another question that we actually want to say yes to. And that question is, do you want to join geometry between the floor and the walls? It's not smart enough to know that on the first floor because it's actually overlapping the foundation, not the brick wall. And since the foundation is on another level from the brick, it wasn't smart enough to ask if I wanted to join that.
I'm sorry, you hit the goggles and do, the little thing comes up, you hit what again?
It's actually not the goggles, it's the view. Just go over to the view properties here. And see where it says section box? You check that box. I'm going to uncheck it, and that gets rid of it. Then I check it, and it comes back on outside the building. So once you get that box to be visible, you click on it. And then you'll see it light up in blue with 6 pairs of triangles all around for each face. So I want the front face of the box. I want to click and drag it back so it's slicing off the front part. So those of you who work in interior design and you're using Revit, you've got to know how to use the section box because it's invaluable to get in and look at the rooms. The other thing I like to do is look at the ceiling so I can like look underneath here and see what happens on the underside of that floor. And so I can cut off the bottom of something like that. I can look under it. So I love that little tool. It makes it so much easier. Now you mentioned the goggles, or I call them the sunglasses, but this temporary hide isolate, that's another way to hide what's behind something. I can select that wall and say I want to hide that, so I do sunglasses hide element. But that's a temporary thing. And once you reset it or once you close and reopen your file, that goes away. And once you plot, it would plot with the wall visible. So, and it's just too hard to hide a bunch of the walls. It's a lot easier to just carve them out with a section box like this. Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't get the slides.
Okay, are you in the plan or the 3D view? Okay. Hang on just a second. Let me take a look and see what you got here. I'm going to zoom. Next thing I want to do is have you go back into that floor and edit the boundary. Now, I did this knowing that architecturally this isn't really correct. And I kind of violated my own rule of Revit, which a lot of people have, which is build it in Revit the way you would really build it in real life. And I think somebody put that into an acronym, BIIB something, 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 I don't know. But I'm not really going to build this the way it was built. And that is, this block of the house was originally there. It had its own floor. Then somebody added on to the back of the house, and they put another floor there. And they took the door and they ran the floor into it. We're going to just kind of pretend that's not how it went, and we're going to go back and edit this floor boundary and go into the notch with it, because I want you to see how to add on a shape to the outline. So now let's select our floor, and I'm going to use the right crossing window, filter out the walls trick again. Now once I have it selected, how do I get back in to edit the sketch? Edit boundary on your ribbon. That only appears when you have a floor, one floor selected. Now we're back in sketch mode. There's our magenta.
All right, pause. What was the first step you took there, Hank?
I did the crossing window, so I selected the edge of the
I
floor.
do that, and it doesn't do anything.
Well, you have to filter out the wall. What's that? Now I can also hold shift to deselect the wall, because the goal is I have to have nothing but one floor selected before that button will appear. Okay. Do the crossing window from right to left. It's got to go from right to left. Then filter. If you go left to right, it thinks you're going to box in things.
And keep the floors and the walls checked.
Uncheck walls, because we only want our one floor to be the only thing we've got selected. I could actually box everything in if I wanted to, left to right, and filter out everything but floors, because I've only got one floor. Either way it works, but the goal, I like the crossing window because then I've only grabbed the edge of that one floor. So then I say edit boundary. Okay, so is everybody with me on the sketch here? Now here's the problem that people tend to do. They tend to want to hit the floor button and go back in and think, okay, they're going to change it. When instead they're going to end up with a second floor. And the floor button back in home is create a new floor. And we're not creating a new one, we're editing the one we already have. So that's why we had to select it and hit the edit boundary button. Now we're ready to say, okay, we want this to actually go back into that L-shaped notch. So we can go back into the pick walls button here. And pick those. Now what's wrong with this? Those are going to the outside of the core instead of the inside. Well, if I hit this little flip arrow and that whole chain, that reverses them so they're going to the inside.
Why is what the ribbon you got showing up is not appearing on my clip?
You have to get back into sketch mode before you'll see that. Well, first of all, change your view to shaded so we can tell if you've got a floor there or not. The colors help. Okay. Yeah, so you want to do a crossing window across there. You're not crossing the floor, you're just crossing these other walls. Start right here. Start right here and go to the lower left. It's got to go left, right to left. Now filter out everything but the floor. So uncheck walls. Now you're down to just one floor. Now you get the edit boundary. Once you click that, now you're in sketch mode.
Where's the edit boundary?
It pops up once you have your floor selected. So go ahead and do a crossing window right to left. And filter out the walls. Now you've got 2 floors selected. That's why it's not letting you edit it. So you have a floor on top of the floor.
Oh.
Because you can
How do I
come in
get rid of
twice.
that?
You must still have another one. So let's go to your 3D view. Put your house up here on the shortcut line. And let's turn on your section box. Which is one of the check boxes there. And we'll select the box and drag it in. Now, if you hover over the edge of the floor, just push one to select it. And delete that. See how it's kind of triangulating? It uses one on top of the other. Now, while you're in this view, you can just select it there and hit edit boundary. And once you've done that, then you're going to want to go back to the view and see what it's doing.
Can you pick this here, should do the floor?
Pick walls, you want to set. The corner with the arrow. Now you want to pick these walls that are right in here. So don't try to pick at the corner. You've already got that wall, so pick in the middle of this wall here. Pick it. And then pick that wall there. Yeah, when you pick walls, you're not trying to define a corner. You're not snapping to endpoints with the pick walls. You're picking somewhere along each segment of the wall so that it's saying, I'm going to put a line right on top of the length of that wall. Now, why do you do this? Well, the reason is if I move one of those walls after I'm finished, the edge of the floor will stretch with it because it's been picked in this sketch mode.
How did you get the 2 balls?
That it just happens to be the line is selected. If I escape, it doesn't get you out of sketch mode. Remember, once you're in sketch mode, you're escaping not from the sketch. I can't move this wall right now. I can't delete that reference point. I can't do anything but draw my sketch lines.
Do I just have to go back to the menu, the pick walls, and click on that addition to get it to be magenta? Because mine is not.
Are you in sketch mode? Yeah. Yeah, there's your, so you want to do pick walls.
Pick walls and do this again?
And click on those walls now. Okay. Well, once you got them picked, let's try the finish, the green check mark, and let's see what happens. Tell me if it gets mad at you. And what's it saying? And remember I said doing a sketch is kind of like taking a pair of scissors and snipping an object out of a piece of paper. Well, if I do that with scissors, I've got 2 separate objects. I don't have one. And in fact, this edge isn't really a separate loop. So when you're sketching a floor, you have to have one outline of that object. It has to close on itself. And you can't have 2 lines that intersect like those 2 do. And when it gives you one of these messages, it usually oranges in the problem as an example of what's wrong. So if you say quit sketching, it means bail out. I'm not going to do anything that I started to do with this floor. So we don't want to do that. We want to continue, fix the problem, and then we can finish. So what do we need to do here? We need just an L shape that comes in and continues around this end here. So right now this is one long line. We want to chop it up into 2 pieces. So we're going to use the split command, and that is found in this modify panel. It's this little bitty button right there. You don't want to accidentally use the one to the right of it, which almost looks identical, to be honest. It just has a little bit of a gap on either side of that red dotted line. It's very subtle. I'm not impressed with some of their little icons. So just forget the one on the right, because that's only useful if you're doing like tilt-up concrete buildings where you have a bunch of gaps built into a continuous wall. So we click the split button. And I use SL as shortcut for that because I don't like looking for that little button. Then you got an X-Acto knife. Now the way the X-Acto knife works is you can either click in 2 spots and cut out a chunk in between them. But there's really no need because what are we going to do after we chop that? We're going to trim the corners so that this goes all the way around, right? So all we have to do is just sever that one long line into 2 pieces. So you just click anywhere in the middle of the line in between the gap. And once I click, it puts a node there, meaning that's now 2 lines instead of 1. So now I can escape out of the split button. I'm done cutting things. And I'm no longer, when you're in sketch mode and you escape, you don't get out of sketch mode, you just deselect any of these tools. So I'm no longer picking walls, I'm no longer drawing lines, I'm no longer splitting. I'm just in the ready to select things mode.
So when you click it right here,
They are end to end, but they're two separate lines now instead of one. So that's what the split button did. It just chopped that in two. And the reason I had to do that is because I want them to go a line here, the L, and a separate line there. So now I trim. And that's the trim button. I like the shortcut TR. So I just trim. And remember, when you trim, don't try to point to the corner because you might accidentally go to the wrong side. Come back on the side you're keeping there and the side you're keeping there. Same thing here. I pick that line, and then I don't pick here, otherwise it trims it that direction. That's wrong. Control Z. I have to pick, when I get to the second line, make sure I go to the left of the endpoint. Now, is that going to work if I finish? That's a single closed loop. So now if I try to finish my sketch, it shouldn't get mad at me. It should say, okay. Now I've got the Nancy Reagan question. I say no. And now I've got one floor that actually runs right through this old wall here, which again, those of you who are architects will say, no, hey, that's probably not right. You're right. But we'll kind of overlook that because I wanted you to do this for the practice. Yeah.
So then that leftover stuff, you just delete it, the leftover like after you trim like this part right here, you just
I didn't actually delete it because all I did was I chopped that one line into two and then I trimmed them both back so there's nothing left in the middle.
I got like a little bit.
You probably clicked twice with your X-Acto knife. So in that case, yeah, go ahead and delete that one. There you go. Yeah, if you click twice with your knife, you've actually chopped it into three pieces. Let me just show you how that works. I'm going to back up for a couple of commands here. Right now, that's one long line. If I use the split button and I chop it in two places, it's really unnecessary because now I have to go back and delete that. Then I have to trim it anyway, so it was a wasted step. But the other way you can use split is if you say, okay, I want to split it and I want to cut out the inner segment between the two clips. Then you've saved yourself from deleting that chunk because it deletes it, but I still have to trim. So why do two clicks when you can just do one?
So you,
Question?
oh yeah, where I have like the two suggested items.
This whole thing?
Yeah.
That tells you the direction of the floor. Remember, this floor had a linear pattern to it, and so this is telling me which way the board pattern will face. It ultimately would be more relevant if I had a structural concrete slab that had rebar going in one direction, or maybe a metal deck floor that had ribs running in one direction. It just defines the direction one way or the other. So in this case, we can ignore it, but really you want it to run east-west. So let's say I had it wrong, and it just depends on which line you happen to pick first. If I go into this button right here, it says span direction. If I click that one and then finish my sketch, well, I forgot to trim here, so let's trim. So I said ignore it. Really, you don't want to ignore it. You want it to run east-west, I think. So if I finish now, and I turn on my floor pattern with VG, and then I say, let's reset the overrides here, clear them, and see the pattern. Well, I lied. That direction doesn't have anything to do with the pattern on the material. It has to do purely with structural orientation, which we don't care about in this case. Because that floor, even though it says 2x10s, what it is in Revit is a solid layer of wood, a solid layer of plywood, and a solid 9¼ inch thick layer of joistness. It doesn't differentiate between a series of joists at 16 or 24. It's just like there's a whole homogeneous layer. So if I look at my 3D again, and I look at that floor, this depth right here, that's the depth of a 2x10, but it's not chopped up into separate 2x10s. It's like one big layer. So it's when you're early in design, you may want to do a floor like that. But when you get further into the project and you want to really show all the joists so I can run ductwork in between the joists, then I probably want to change to a floor that just has the wood and the plywood and nothing below it. And then I can put in actual beams or a framing system that shows my joists. So this is really just kind of a schematic representation for the floor joists.
So can you put actual floor joists or trusses in Revit?
Yeah. Yeah, and it'll do that You can use Revit structure, but you don't have to. Most of that works in Revit architecture. The only exception is if you want to build real trusses that have cord members and everything, then you want to use Revit structure, which I do have installed here. So if you felt like fooling with it, it's in the lab. That means you still got it selected. Remember, anything that's selected is blue. So just escape or click in white space to deselect. Yeah. And remember, when you go to select something, it outlines in a dark blue. Once you click it, it lights up in a light blue. So if you've done what you want to do to it, escape, or click away from it, and then you'll see the results of what you've done. Any other questions on that floor sketch here? If I pull my section box in this way, you can see what's happening. I've actually got my floor running right on through that foundation wall on the back, which is not really how we want to do it, but before I really got into showing the section box, I want to talk about actual building sections that you cut. So let me look at my handout and see if I talk about this. Yeah, I didn't show it on here, but I want to go ahead and show you how to cut a building section. So let's go to our plan now. Does everybody have that floor so it looks right? And if you're ever in a situation where you think you might have more than one, my solution is to hover and click one of them and delete it. And if there's another, click it and delete it, another, click and delete until they're all gone. Once they're all gone, then undo once, and you'll be back to just having one instead of multiple ones on top of each other. And you'll find that happens even more with ceilings. So when we do assignment F2 with ceilings, it's very easy to click, get a ceiling, click again, get a second ceiling, a third one, and so sometimes people might have 5 ceilings superimposed on each other. Okay, so let's go to our plan, our work level 1 existing plan. Now let's cut a section through the building. Any idea on where we would find sections? What kind of element in Revit is a section? View. So we go to the View ribbon tab, look for section. And now there are 3 potential kinds of sections: a building section, a wall section, or a detail. So we want to do a building section. We're going to cut all the way through our building. So let's start by cutting one going east-west looking to the north. So I click once, and I click again, and there's my symbolic representation for the section. But the difference between AutoCAD and Revit is when you cut a section in Revit, you've literally created another view. And if you look down in your browser, you should see something that now says building section, and it's called section 1. So I recommend always renaming these. As soon as you create a section, right-click on it in the browser and say rename, and I'm going to call this, let's see, I'm going to call it cross section, cross looking north. Because there's no reason to say building section. Building cross-section looking north, because it's already listed under sections, building section. So don't be redundantly redundant by naming it something it already says. I like to keep my view names short and sweet, so that if I'm looking for which view I'm looking for here, I don't have to scroll all the way to the right in this browser and just read the whole name. Just right-click on it in the browser and hit rename. I put cross looking north. You could also say main house looking north. In other words, you know, this is the old part of the house, that's the appendage. There's a couple different things you can do to it. First of all, you can select the line and then stretch how far away the arrowhead is from the rest of the building. You can do the same with the tail. Now, I'm at 1/4 inch equals a foot in my plan view. If I change that to 8 scale or to 1/2 inch, if I go to 1/2 inch, see how the arrowhead looks like it shrunk by half? That's because as you blow up a view on a sheet to twice as big, the annotation looks twice as small, even though it's the same size printed out on paper. So that's what scale does. It responds to those changes between your annotation and your building. Now the problem is I was at 1/4 inch when I cut that section, so what happens if I go to an 8 scale? It disappeared. Well, believe it or not, when I started using Revit, I wasn't quite sure what was happening when that happened. And what is happening is, whatever scale you're at when you cut it, Revit assumes that you don't want it to show up on a more zoomed out scale than that. So if I was at 1/4 inch and I cut it and I changed to 1/8, it goes away. If I have another view, like this L1 existing view here, it doesn't show there either because that was smaller scale than 1/4 inch. So what I can do is I can go to my sections on the browser, select it, and then I look at its properties. So you don't have to be in a view to see the view properties. You can also just highlight it in the browser. So see, this says building section. If I scroll down, it says main looking north. That's the right view. Now, if you scroll down, it says hide at scales coarser than. And again, I didn't know this when I first started using Revit. If I click in that box, it says it's going to hide it if your view is more coarse than 1/4 inch scale. So if I drop that down to 1/8 inch equals a foot and apply it, now I see this section in my 3/16 scale view, and I would also see it in an 1/8 scale view. Now, your other question about how to modify graphically how the section looks, well, okay, that part, you have to put it on a sheet before it will let you name it. It automatically fills in the blanks, and it says, okay, it's on sheet A1, and it's called section S1. But if I want to change the direction of which way it's pointing, and this is kind of fun, let's pull up our section that we just created. You can double-click it, or you can double-click on the section arrowhead. That brings it up. Remember, anything that's blue, you can click on it to do something. So, like that arrowhead, you can double-click it, and it brings up the section view. I'm going to change it to shaded, and I'm going to change it. Remember this coarse, medium, and fine level of detail? If we change it to fine level of detail, then we get to see the sheathing, or the plaster, the plywood, and the finished wood, and the joist. So that's how we want to look at our section to really see how the building is put together. We've got a footing down here made of concrete. We've got a wall made of stone. We've got this brick. And notice how each separate piece is separated by a heavy outline. Well, when you draw a hand-drawn detail, you normally draw it heavy on the outside, and you draw all the separation inside that assembly thin lines. Well, Revit does that, but when you've got two elements touching, you have to join them. Remember how we did the join geometry with our plaster against the brick and plan? We can use that same join geometry command here in section. So if I go into the modify join, pick the brick wall and the foundation wall, now see how it's just a thin line where they touch. Again, I can do join the floor to the foundation wall. Now I can see that that's technically eating in by 1 inch into, it's burying into the foundation. Well, again, that's probably not the architectural detail it should be, but...
I'm sorry, after you hit join, you clicked what?
You click one and then the second one. So the two things to join, let me back up here. Right now, there's 3 elements. There's the top wall, the bottom wall, and the floor. And all 3 of them are not joined. So I don't have to select anything. I hit the button first. Then I say, okay, I want to join the brick to the foundation. So I click brick and click the foundation. Then I have to join the floor to the foundation. So I click the floor and the foundation. Then I have to join the brick wall to the floor because there's a little bit where they touch. The plaster touches the wood. So if I click those two, now I've joined a 3-way join. This to this, this to that, and that to this.
I think, when I'm going to the scale,
Okay. Are you at 1/4 inch scale? Go ahead and set that to 1/4 inch. And then the only other possible thing that might be wrong, do all your lines look thin?
yeah, because if I don't use the line button, there's just really thick lines.
Okay. Okay, so when you turn on thin lines, you won't see line weights. That's what that button does. It's kind of like wearing dark glasses inside. If you wear your dark glasses inside, you won't see much. So you want to turn that off if you want to see the difference in line weight. And if they're too blurred together, like at 8 scale, I can't really see where the plaster starts and where the wood is. So for that, I change the scale of the view. Bump it up to a 1/4 inch or even a 1/2 inch scale. And when you do that, then you'll read the heavy and the thin lines better. Because
button if you click on which join.
it's in the Modify tab right here. Looks like a blue square interpenetrating as a blue circle. And any of these buttons, if you hover long enough, it'll show you a little video of what the button does. It's kind of cool.
What are you trying to join?
I'm joining, there's 3 objects that all have to be joined to each other. So it's kind of like a love triangle going on here. I want the brick and the concrete, or the stone. I want the stone and the floor, and I want the floor and the brick, because the brick also contains plaster.
Do you have to do that to all sides of it?
Well, in this case, you do. If you go over to the left side of our section, I got the same situation, so I can do join brick to foundation, foundation to floor, and floor to brick. But that would be a pain. So what I say is, well, in this particular situation, if you cut a section through the building here, join it when you look at it in section. But really, it would be better to have them all joined, because that way if I cut a section later that goes somewhere else, they show correctly. So that's where my 3D view with the section box comes in really handy.
Why would my
Because when you first make a section, some of the view properties aren't the way we want them. Like, it doesn't go to shaded. And what's this other button right here? That's detail level. You probably have it on coarse. So if you change that to fine level of detail and shaded, then your brick wall should be red and you should see the plaster layer in the brick. It'll do the same for the floor. Yeah. Let me do it in another section. I'm going to cut a north-south section looking to the east. So I'm going to go to my existing view again. I'm going to go, and this time rather than going to view and hitting section, I'm going to use my quick access toolbar up here, and there's a section button up there as well. Now I like to collapse this little type of keyword box so then I can see the rest of my quick access. This projector and these monitors are just a low enough resolution I don't quite see all my tools. So there's the section. I want a building section. I'm going to cut it. Now this one I'm going to cut right down through the center of things pretty much. So I'm going to cut, and it's probably going to cut through the front door once we create that. So then I want to go down here and it shows as section 1. I want to rename it. And I want to say that, call that longitudinal looking east. And again, I like to keep them abbreviated, but I still want to be able to make that out. So if somebody else comes in here, they say, oh, that's the main building looking north. That's the longitudinal section looking to the east. Now if I go to that view, now again, like Christian, you probably don't have it at fine level detail, so we'll change that, change it to shaded. Now, normally when you're doing a set of drawings, you probably won't have everything in color. But I like to change it to color so those of you in the back of the room can see it better up on the screen. And then I'm going to change my scale from an 1/8 inch up to 3/16 so I can see things just a little bit clearer. So now, to answer your question,
If you, go ahead.
to do the join again, you hit the join button, which is in Modify. And so I want to join 3 pairs. I've got 3 objects, so I have to join A to B, B to C, and C to A, basically.
The join was only in a particular section only.
Actually, no.
Because if we already joined the wall in the other section, why does it not show up on this section?
Because this is a different wall. We got 4 sides to our
okay,
box.
that's right.
So I could actually do the joining in 3D if I wanted to and then cut the section. And that's kind of where I was going with this is somebody said, do you have to join all of them? I said, well, yeah, but you don't have to because you won't see it. But it's good to do it. That way when you come back later and cut sections through your building, they're all going to look right. Now this is kind of a pain because normally when you create a floor, it asks the Nancy Reagan question, which we say no to, but then it asks another question, which is, do you want to join geometry between the floor, which is overlapping the walls, and the walls? And if you say yes, then it's going to join all edges of the floor. So when we create our second floor, it's going to make life a lot easier because it asks us. It's smart enough to say this second floor is penetrating the plaster up here, and it goes through that wall that I see. Revit sees it. It says, do you want to join? I say yes. Then it joins floor to wall, floor to wall, floor to wall on every edge of every wall in that same floor. So the first floor is a pain only because the brick doesn't come down low enough.
That would be the same wall, basically.
Basically, yeah. It's confused by the fact that when I built the floor, I was on the first level, but the foundation was below it, so it didn't ask me that question. But let's go ahead and do the second floor now. Well, what am I missing? I don't have a second floor plan. So what do I need here? Let's go to an elevation view and see what levels we have. So let's pull up existing south under building elevations. And look at this, we don't even have a second floor level. So you can't create a floor plan if there's not a level there. So there's a couple different ways. Remember, we fooled with reference planes a little bit. That's one kind of datum. We've looked at these levels, but we haven't really created them before. And then when we get to the next assignment, actually it's E, we're going to create column grids, and we're going to put some beams and columns in the basement. So there's three kinds of datums, and they're basically flat planes in space. There's a level, which is at different heights. There's a reference plane, which can be vertical or horizontal, or angled. And then there are column grids, which are vertical planes. So how do we create one of these level datums? Any ideas? You can copy. So if I select the first floor level, and I say copy, but I have to be in a section or an elevation view to see them. There's nowhere that you can go to say, list all the levels in my project. You have to just look at one of the views that's a vertical view looking at an elevation or section.
Create similar.
You can do that too. That's a good guess.
Monkey?
Create similar. Well, actually, we want to create a level. So a building section is cut vertically looking horizontally at the building, and that's why we can see our levels, because they're horizontal flat planes, and you have to be slicing through them to see them. When you look down, you don't see that surface of that level. So Brad had a real good method. He said right-click create similar. Now, if you didn't use that, you could go to the Home tab, and there's a level button to create a new one. Or you can also find that same button under Structure. You can create a level there. So the two main ways are one way or another to create a new one or to copy one. So Corey's method and the Brad / other ways of doing it method where you're creating new. So let's start by copying one like Corey suggested. Select the first floor. And let's see, in the handout I think I tell you how high I want that level. 9'4". So I can hit the copy button, which is this circle with circles, arrow thing. Now, when you say copy and you know it wants to go up exactly 9'4", it doesn't really matter where your start and end point are as long as they're 9'4" apart from each other. So you could start here and go up 9'4". What I don't want you to do is don't try to snap to something because you might accidentally miss. It's better to either click there or just click in a white space and say, I want to go up exactly 9'4", up from whatever I started with. So I can say 9 space, whoops, I angled it, didn't I? Let's try that again. You want to make sure that when you move exactly vertically, 9 space 4. I didn't mean move, I meant copy, sorry. Select, copy. Copy and move are just the same process, just one of them keeps the old one and the other one moves it. So now what's different about the plate height and the level 11, and I want it to say level 2, so if I select the line of the level, now you just click on the text and change it to level 2. Or second floor, I guess we should be consistent. First floor, second floor, so spell it out. Now let's say we got the height wrong. You can select it and click on that 9'4" and change it to 8 feet. That moves it down. The other way you can move it is to put a dimension, VI, from level to level. Click it down, and if I want it to 9'4", I can select the level. Just like we were doing with walls, I can select that and say I want that to be 9'4" away from the other level. So that's 3 different ways to get it in the right place. But what do you notice graphically about the second floor level that's different than the first floor? It's black instead of blue. And remember, anything that's blue you can click on and do something with. So if I double click the blue head of that level, it takes me to one of my first floor plans. It happens to choose L1 existing art shows 64. That other one's black because if you look, there's no second floor plan view yet. So if you copy it, you have to go back and create a plan view. And to do that, where do you think we'd create a new plan view? View, and then there's a create panel, and then there's a plan views button. So if you go down there, there's a floor plan. Now what this does is it says, okay, I'm not going to show you all the levels in your building because I know you've already got a first floor plan view and you've already got a basement plan view. So I'm only going to list the ones that are black that don't have their own plan yet. If for some reason you wanted to create another first floor view, you could uncheck this little checkbox and say, I want to see all the levels. But normally it will only show you levels that don't yet have their own floor plan. So I can select second floor. I can set the scale now, or I can always change it later. And then when you say OK, now I have a second floor view. So if I control tab back to my elevation, now that's blue because it has its own plan view.
How did you do that?
Let me undo. Get out of the way. So I went to the View tab because I know the levels there, there's just not a plan view of it. Go to View, go to Create, Plan Views, and Floor Plan. And now I get this little dialog that says New Plan, and I say I want to select the second floor level because every floor plan has to be based on a level of the building.
How come when I did that, I didn't have a flat?
Plate height?
Yeah.
Did you delete it? Does it show up in your section?
Yeah.
I got two basement, first floor, second
Look up a
floor.
little higher.
I got that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
but-
blue.
Right,
See how this is blue? That means you already have a view for the plate height level.
okay.
And I
You're
don't.
saying okay,
Mhm.
when I highlighted this before and did the view,
You actually don't have to have anything highlighted. You just go to the view and say floor plan. That's because you don't have any levels that are black. They're all on the camera floor plan. So if you want to go back now and make another second floor plan in addition to what's there, you can check that box.
gotcha.
And then it shows you all the levels. So this is just a way of filtering out the ones that you already have created something for. So now if instead of doing that, I'm going to undo, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to delete that level. And that deletes the view because if there's no second floor level, there can't be a second floor plan view. Now, Brad's method, which is to create a similar one, either right click create similar or works the same way as going to home and saying level. Then I just draw the level in. So I'm just going to say I'm going to start there. And the first click gives you a free end and the second click gives you a label at the end. So I called it level 12 because the last one I placed was level 11. So now it came in with its own floor plan view. So now there's a view called level 12. So when you create a new level using either create similar or the level button, it automatically says you want a view to go with it. And if I back up here, there's actually an option to not do that. If I go level, right here it says make plan view. So that's going to tell me that as I click this, it's going to create a plan. And it's actually going to create ceiling plan and floor plan unless I say, well, I only want a floor plan. Then it doesn't create a ceiling plan for that level as well. So if I'm up at a roof level, I might not want a ceiling plan of the roof because it would look up in the sky. It would be empty. So I renamed the level from level 12 to second floor.
David, what was your go to draw that?
To draw the level, I actually did the level button here on the main home tab. Right there. Or if you like shortcuts, LL is the shortcut for level. That's one I don't really use.
Change the level.
You have to rename it after you created it. So if I create it, it's just going to pick the next available number, and I called it level 13. Now it creates a floor plan called level 13 that corresponds because Revit is thinking very early schematic. Each floor has one view. But we know from doing architecture and interior design and engineering that a lot of times you'll have more than one plan of the same level of the building. You might have a first floor architectural plan, a first floor furniture plan, first floor electrical plan, whatever. So Revit is still thinking early stages where you have one view the same as the level. So if I rename the level from level 13 to second floor, assumes is that we want to rename the floor plan to go with it. So first time I do that, I say, yes, I want to rename the view. So now I've got a view called second floor. Problem is, I like to name my views so that I understand there could be several of each. So that's why I put an L0, L1, L2, and roof in front of it. And that tells me, and then the work views, I put work in front of them. So that tells me which level it's on, and they sort from bottom to top. So I'm going to rename the view now, and I'm going to change it from second floor to L2. Well, actually, I'm just going to call it work, L2, exist. And really, you don't even really need to call your working views. That was kind of my mistake in the template. It really shouldn't say existing architectural. It's just an existing working plan that I can turn on and off furniture. I can make it an architectural plan. I can make it a colored plan, whatever I want. A working view is just that. It's a view that you use to work on the model. It's not something you're going to put on the sheet and say, here it is, it's finished. Now this question this time, if I say yes to this, it bites me in the foot. Because then it changes the name of the level, work L2 exist. And I can't tell you how many times somebody will turn in their final project at the end of the year, and they'll have, instead of saying second floor, it'll say something like this. Because when they renamed the view, they ran right through the stop sign that said, do you want to do this? And you said yes, and it renamed the level as well. So
When I rename it, it doesn't pop up as rename.
Well, you don't have a floor plan, it's black. So go back into your view floor plan. And then select second floor. So now you've got each of the two. So then you rename your view. So I'm going to rename it and call it L2, or I'm going to do work L2 dash exist. And I say no to that, so the level is still called second floor. So now if I go to my work L2 existing plan view and pull it up, look on its view properties, the level that it's tied to is second floor. And notice how that's grayed out, because once you create a floor plan, you can't say, oh, it's a second floor view, now I want to change it to make it into a first floor plan view. It's stuck being tied to the second floor.
How do you align your back or elevation? How do you align your second level with your first floor?
Let's take a look at that. That's a good question. Let me go to my section view again. So let's say yours, I'm going to just kind of pull it out of whack on purpose here for me. Maybe they don't line up like that. Okay, and I'm going to mess that up on purpose too here. So it really wants them, if I select the plate height and I move that over, see how they all move with it because they line up. If I select that one, I grab this little circle that's attached to the level head, and if I drag it over until it lines up, it does a little blue dotted line that says those line up now, and it now links all three of them. So now if I grab it again, they all move together. And it's really convenient that it makes these assumptions, because it really makes life easy when you're cleaning up your drawings. This stuff, you'd be surprised that once you know how to use Revit, how quickly you can format these views, put them on a sheet, plot them, and you're done. The hard part is just building the 3D model. Everything else goes quickly once you know how to do it. So if I wanted to pull that away so that it's different, you can hit this lock after you select it, and then it can move on its own. And the minute you move it back and it clicks into alignment, then they go together again.
Even for the template, did you set up the top of footing jog down like that, or this is how it is?
I had to set that up, because if you pull it and snap it back straight, those two levels, at least at 1/4 inch scale, they overlap. If I went to like 3/4 of an inch equals a foot, then they wouldn't overlap as badly, but they still overlap. So what I did is I selected the top of footing and I clicked this little break symbol on it. It says add elbow. And once you do that, then you can adjust where the elbow is and how high this is. But the funny thing about it is it still understands that is -8 foot 8. Even though this part of the level is probably more like 10 feet below the first floor, this part is what counts, this line over here. And so when you want to stretch it, this circle is still up where the rest of the line is. It's not down here. So if you want to move it to the right, don't try to click down here, go up here. And if you want to unlock it, then you can drag that over, whoops, unlock, and drag it separately.
Now, what if you did want to call out every single floor on a building? Can you take the level call out off your elevation?
Well, normally, if you don't want to see them, you go to VG, right? And you say, okay, where would levels be? They're annotation. So I go down
Say you want the first,
levels.
third, down second.
Then VG didn't work because it turns off the whole category. But if you wanted to do that, and this isn't limited to levels, this is for any element in Revit in a particular view. If you don't want to see that level or that wall or that door or that piece of furniture in a view, you have the option of, let's say I don't want to see that top of footing. Right click on it, and there's a hide in view option that says elements. If I say category, it's the same thing as VH or VG, and I uncheck it. I don't want that. So I right click hide in view elements, and it's just the one that I have selected, or ones. Now, how do you get it back? Well, normally you'd go to VG and recheck levels, but if I go to VG now, levels are still checked because I didn't hide that whole category. I just hid one of them in this view. So how do you get it back? There's only one tool, only one way to get it back on, and that is on your view control bar. It's what I call the magic light bulb. And it's like if you've ever watched a crime TV show where they have a crime scene where they've had blood stains and somebody scrubbed them off. So you walk in the room in the daytime, you don't see the blood, but at night they come in with a special light that lights them up in red or green. Or if you remember, like me, in the old days when you went to the dentist, they had you chew a little red tablet to see where you didn't brush. You hit the light bulb and it lights up anything that's been hidden. That's the only way to get it turned back on. And you know, actually in my class this has happened. Somebody didn't even know what they were doing, and they right-click and they said, "Oh, let's hide that." And they said, "Well, Hayden, what happened to my first floor? It's gone. What do I do?" If you look at another view, it's still in the other views because this is a view-specific thing. But the only way to get it back is to turn on the light bulb and then right-click on it and say Unhide in View Elements. Now, you can't unhide the category because all the category of levels isn't hidden, just that one or two or however many of them you hid. So I turn it back off and then I see it. So I can turn it on again and unhide this one as well.
So is that that would apply as well?
Yes. Whatever I do there is exactly what I get when I plot. Unlike the sunglasses, which is only temporary. So the sunglasses are one of the few things that when you say I want to hide that, I want to hide that with the sunglasses, even though it's gone in the view, I've got that box around there to remind me, that's a temporary thing. If I either plot this view or if I save and close Revit and reopen it, that goes back to normal, the way it was before.
Is there a way to tell between the temporary and the permanent items?
If you turn on the magic light bulb, it'll show the temporary in cyan and the permanent in red. And what's more, if you say, oh, I like that, I really want to change that to a permanent condition instead of temporary, you go to the sunglasses and it says apply, hide, isolate to view. And now it's a permanent change and it'll plot that way. And then I have to use the magic light bulb again to get it back on. I'm going to cross both of those and right-click Unhide Elements. And turn it back off. So good question. How are we doing on time? We're about halfway through, so why don't we take a break. And I'm going to save, and I'm going to stop the recording so I can burn that one. Let's see a second. First one.